I'm what they call a thought leader in the MDM space. And on these sessions, I share insights, best practices, tips, tricks, you name it, recommendations on how to get more from your investment in master data management and data management as a whole. Let's talk today about data cleanups. Dun, dun, dun. When I was a Gartner analyst, which was for a period of almost 3 years, I often got the question of, how do I clean up my data? I'm embarking on MDM, so I need to clean up all of my data. Or as a key dependency for my MDM program, I'm embarking on a giant data cleanup. Or I have hired a bunch of expensive consultants and they're going to clean up all of my data, and on and on. The core question really becomes, I think, at a high level, is cleaning up data a dependency for MDM? Short answer, no, it is not. Let me repeat. Cleaning up data is not a dependency for successful master data management. Now, there are some times when cleaning data is arguably more justified than others, and we'll talk about those situations where data cleanups are a little more justified in more detail. But at a high level, the answer is no. You don't need to necessarily clean up your data as a hard dependency for MDM. Let's dive into this a little bit more, because I know this is going to sound kind of heretical to a lot of folks. They're like, what do you mean we don't have to clean up our data? This is all about data cleanliness. This is about having accurate, consistent, trustworthy data for our master data domains. And those things are all true. But hear me out on this one, guys. I would argue you don't have to necessarily get involved in a prolonged data cleanup. So that's kind of first thing. Let's talk about data cleanups as a dependency. Well, there's nothing about MDM that says that your data has to be 100% accurate all the time, right? What I would tell my clients at Gartner is that a key dependency for your MDM program is having some quantified metrics that measure the impact that you are expected to drive through an MDM program, right? And through a business lens, through the lens of a business outcome. Meaning, how much more sales are you going to generate? How much cost savings will you generate? Or how much risk will you mitigate for the business in dollar terms, right? That absolutely positively should be a hard dependency of an MDM program, having some idea of what your ROI is going to be, what your business outcomes are going to be, and the financial benefit to your organization of taking those measures. So that most certainly, I would argue, should be a hard dependency for an MDM program at some level, having some idea of quantified business outcomes. So if you do that, if you have an understanding of what you think you're going to drive from an MDM perspective, I would argue, and the phrase I'm going to use here is price in. I would argue that you can price in a certain level of bad data into that analysis. Meaning, can you meet the business needs with the data that you have currently from a data quality perspective, right? And a part of this does assume that you will be able to do some sort of baseline assessment of your overall data quality. There are third-party data vendors who certainly can help with that, particularly in the B2B realm, but also in the B2C realm. You can get a pretty decent feel for where you're starting from a data accuracy perspective, particularly in the customer domain, people or companies. A little bit less so. It's going to be a little harder with other domains, maybe like product or asset or other kind of domains, particularly in the manufacturing realm. But I would argue that you can get some idea of where you're starting from a data quality perspective. And when you build out that business case for MDM, you can say, you know what, we're looking for 70, 80, 90% accuracy here, right? We don't need 100% accuracy because 100% is a fool's errand. You will never get to 100% data accuracy. You won't, unless you're talking like 100 fields of data. Maybe you might, and even then it's going to be tough to stay on top of it all. So you're never going to get to 100%. But in that business case that you're building, can you price in a certain level of lower quality data? Can you price in the fact that you will have 20 or 30% of your records that will not be easily mastered and that will potentially be kind of lower quality? I would argue the answer to that is yes. And I would also argue that you can most certainly drive business value even with a certain level of bad data. Now, things get a little bit more challenging here, particularly when we are looking at the core two styles of MDM: analytical MDM, where you're trying to solve for a 360 of something, or operational MDM, where you're trying to create a master record and use that master record in downstream business processes like CRM or ERP or other downstream processes. In analytical forms of MDM, I would absolutely argue, hands down, no, absolutely, you do not have to get into a prolonged data cleanup at all, because you can still drive incredible value simply by doing your best job that you can at linking like records together to create as much of that 360 view as possible. I would argue 360 again is probably unattainable, but can you drive good value? Can you solve business problems by getting to a 280 or maybe even just a 180, where a certain degree of bad data is to be expected to a certain level? I would answer yes, absolutely, positively can, and you probably should. Right? That you should go out there, drive value, find a way to solve some problems, and then use those successes maybe to leverage for some sort of cleanups later on down the road. But starting from where most companies are starting from, analytical MDM, I would argue, do not waste your time in some sort of prolonged data cleanup. Operational MDM, things get a little trickier, right? Things get a little trickier, and that is the one situation where I would argue that perhaps a data cleanup is justified. However, to do that, you do still need to have some idea of what your expected business outcomes are, right? You do need to have some idea of where you're starting from a data quality perspective. And before you get into a data cleanup, you absolutely positively need to know where you're starting from and where you think you're going to get to. You'll never get to 100, but let's assume you're starting at 70 and that you want to get to 90. What's that going to cost and how long is it going to take? Because this is another reason why data cleanups, wherever possible, should probably be avoided, is because they can take an awfully long time. When I was doing this for a living, my back of the napkin assessment was one human being working at a really, really good pace can clean maybe about 1,000 records in a month. That assumes that you have well-documented business rules for when something is accurate or inaccurate, when something is high quality and when something is low quality. Most companies struggle with that, by the way. So even if you assume you have those rules, and again, a lot of companies struggle just to come up with them, but even if you assume you have them, one person can clean about 1,000 records. That means if you've got 20, 30, 50,000 records that you think are inaccurate or low quality, you're talking about a small army here to get this data cleaned up, and that's not going to be cheap. So if you are considering a data cleanup in support of an operational style of MDM, you need to go into that process with eyes wide open. You need to understand how much this is going to cost you and what it's going to get you. Also, you need to stop the flow of garbage in, because if you do not, then you're going to be right back to where you started from in another 6 to 12 months. You'll be facing another data cleanup that's going to take a decent chunk of time with a decent chunk of money to get it done. So, in conclusion here, are data cleanups a hard dependency for MDM? No, they're not. Particularly analytical styles of MDM, and that's where most companies start. So I would argue, don't get yourself sucked into some prolonged, expensive data cleanup initiative when you don't need to. Again, particularly with analytical styles. If you're looking at more of an operational style, you may need to do some level of data cleanup to get you to the point where the business is confident with the data that you're providing and that you are driving value per that business case that I was talking about. But again, you need to go into that eyes wide open. You need to go into that with some realistic expectations around your quality metrics. You need to go in with realistic expectations about how long it's going to take and the benefit that it's going to drive. Anyway, guys, that's it for today. There's a lot to think about there. Probably I'll do some more follow-ups here on the issue of data cleanups, because these can take a long time and cost a lot of money and drive dubious benefit. That's it for today. I hope you got some value from this conversation. I look forward to seeing you on another episode of MDM Bytes sometime very soon. Thanks all.